The water is cold. Bone-deep cold. The kind that seeps through wool and canvas and makes a man forget what warmth feels like. Private James Holloway stands in the landing craft, pressed shoulder to shoulder with 30 other men, and feels the sea spray sting his face. It's not yet dawn on June 6, 1944. The English Channel churns beneath the flat-bottomed Higgins boat, and every man aboard knows that in less than an hour, they'll be running across an open beach while German machine guns track their movements. What none of them know, what they can't possibly know, is that this moment exists because of a choice made by a man with charts and barometers instead of rifles. A man who understood that the difference between life and death could be measured in knots of wind and feet of tide. If you want to understand how small decisions ripple outward to save thousands of lives, how science becomes heroism in ways we never see, then stay with us. And if you're finding value in stories that uncover the hidden architecture of history, hit that subscribe button now, because we're about to show you a side of D-Day that changes everything you thought you knew. Captain Robert Thornton stands in a cramped meteorological station on the southern coast of England, surrounded by weather maps that look more like abstract art than science. It's 3 days before the planned invasion. Outside, rain hammers the windows. The barometric pressure has been falling for 18 hours. Thornton is 32 years old, a former university lecturer who now holds the fate of the largest amphibious operation in human history in his weathered hands. He's not alone. 3 other forecasters crowd the small room, comparing readings from weather ships stationed far out in the Atlantic, from reconnaissance flights that risk German fighters to measure cloud cover and wind speed at altitude, from coastal observers who radio in data every 3 hours. The technology they work with would seem primitive decades later. No satellites. No computer models. No radar weather maps. Just barometers, anemometers, thermometers, and human intuition built on years of watching how storms move across the ocean. The original plan called for an invasion on June 5th. But Thornton and his team see something in the data that makes his stomach clench. A deep, low-pressure system is moving across the Atlantic, bringing high winds, heavy cloud cover, and rough seas. The kind of conditions that turn landing craft into coffins. The kind of weather that scatters paratroopers across the countryside like seeds, miles from their drop zones. The kind of storm that makes naval bombardment impossible because gunners can't see their targets through the clouds. He picks up the telephone to call Supreme Headquarters. His recommendation is clear and carries the weight of thousands of lives. Postpone. Let this system pass. General Eisenhower makes the hardest decision of the war. He delays. The invasion fleet, already loaded and moving toward France, turns back. 175,000 men who had steeled themselves for battle must now wait, must hold that terrible tension for another day, maybe more. But Thornton isn't finished. He sees something else in the data, something that most forecasters would miss. A brief window. A gap in the weather between 2 storm systems. Not perfect conditions, but survivable. Better than survivable, if they time it right. If they choose the right hour, the right state of tide, the right alignment of wind and current. Here's what Thornton understands that makes all the difference. The English Channel isn't just water. It's a complex system of tides, currents, and wind patterns that interact in ways that can help or destroy an invasion fleet. The tide rises and falls twice daily, and the height of that rise matters desperately. At low tide, the Germans have planted thousands of obstacles along the beaches. Steel rails angled to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Wooden stakes topped with mines. Concrete tetrahedrons designed to stop tanks. Some of these obstacles are visible at low tide. Some are hidden just beneath the surface at mid-tide. The original plan called for landing at low tide, giving engineers time to blow gaps in the obstacles before the main force arrived. But Thornton sees a different approach. What if they land at a rising mid-tide, when most obstacles are visible but the water is deep enough to reduce the distance men must run across open sand? What if they time it so the tide is coming in fast, pushing landing craft toward shore instead of dragging them sideways? What if they wait for a moment when the wind shifts from the prevailing westerly to a temporary northeastern breeze, reducing the chop and making it easier for smaller craft to navigate? The mathematics of amphibious warfare are brutal and precise. Wave height matters. When waves exceed 4 feet, landing craft become difficult to control. Men get seasick, reducing their effectiveness before they ever reach the beach. Equipment gets soaked with salt spray, jamming weapons and radios. The ramps of Higgins' boats slam down on sand instead of settling gently, throwing men off balance as they charge into machine gun fire. Wind direction matters. A strong onshore wind creates bigger waves and more turbulence in the surf zone, that dangerous area where water meets land and boats must navigate through breaking waves. A crosswind pushes landing craft off course, scattering them along the beach instead of concentrating them at the planned sectors. This means units get mixed up, officers lose contact with their men, and the carefully planned assault becomes chaos. Cloud cover matters. Heavy clouds prevent Allied aircraft from providing close air support. They make naval bombardment less accurate. They help German defenders by hiding Allied movements, but they also ground Allied reconnaissance, making it impossible to spot enemy reinforcements moving toward the beaches. Thornton studies the data for his revised window. June 6th, not June 5th. Morning, not afternoon. A rising tide, not a low tide. And here's the critical element that changes everything. The wind. On June 5th, the winds would have been westerly, blowing hard onshore from the Atlantic, creating rough seas and high waves. By the morning of June 6th, Thornton sees a temporary shift. A high-pressure system moving in behind the low creates a brief period of reduced wind, with a slight northeastern component. This means the wind blows at an angle to the beaches instead of straight onshore. It means wave height drops from 5 or 6 feet to 3 or 4 feet. It means landing craft can navigate more easily through the surf zone. It means fewer boats swamp or capsize. It means more men reach the beach alive. But there's something else Thornton notices, something that would make this hypothetical window even better if they could wait just a few more hours. The tide. If they land later in the morning, during a different phase of the tidal cycle, the current will be weaker. The English Channel experiences some of the strongest tidal currents in the world. During peak current flow, the water can move at 3 or 4 knots, which is faster than a man can swim and strong enough to push landing craft significantly off course. But during slack tide, that brief period when the tide changes direction, the current drops to nearly nothing. Thornton realizes that if they time the landing for slack tide, with the improved wind conditions, they could reduce navigational errors, reduce the distance boats drift off course, and increase the accuracy of the landing. This matters enormously. When landing craft hit their assigned sectors, units stay together. When units stay together, they can execute their plans. When plans get executed, objectives get taken. When objectives get taken quickly, fewer men die. The hypothetical scenario we're exploring suggests that these improved conditions, this better choice of tidal and wind window, could reduce casualties by approximately 52%. Let's be absolutely clear about what this number represents. It's not a documented historical fact. It's a thoughtful estimate based on what we know about how environmental conditions affect amphibious operations, drawn from post-war analyses of D-Day and other landings. Military historians have studied how wave height, wind speed, tidal current, and visibility affect casualty rates in beach assaults. They've looked at landings in the Pacific, in North Africa, in Sicily and Italy. The pattern is consistent. When conditions are favorable, casualties drop dramatically. When conditions are harsh, casualties soar. The 52% figure is a way of quantifying what better conditions might have meant for the men who landed on those beaches. It's a tool for understanding just how much the weather mattered. How much Thornton and his fellow forecasters mattered, even though their names appear in no monuments. Now imagine how this plays out on the beach. James Holloway, the private we met in the landing craft, is part of the first wave hitting Omaha Beach. In the actual invasion, Omaha was a nightmare. The naval bombardment missed most German positions. The bombers, flying blind through clouds, dropped their payloads inland, leaving beach defenses intact. Landing craft drifted off course in strong currents and high winds. Units landed in the wrong sectors. Officers couldn't find their men. The 116th Infantry Regiment suffered 75% casualties in the first hour. Companies that should have had 200 men reached the seawall with 20 or 30. But in our hypothetical improved window, things unfold differently. The Higgins boat carrying Holloway and his platoon approaches the beach through manageable waves. The coxswain, a 19-year-old from Louisiana named Marcus Webb, can actually see where he's going because visibility is better, because the spray isn't as thick, because the wind isn't whipping foam into his eyes. Webb keeps the boat pointed straight toward his assigned sector, a stretch of sand marked on his chart as easy red. The current isn't fighting him as hard. He doesn't have to overcorrect, doesn't drift a quarter mile down the beach to where German guns have perfect enfilade. He reaches the sandbar 300 yards from shore, and the boat settles smoothly instead of slamming down. The ramp drops. Holloway charges into chest-deep water, but he doesn't stumble, doesn't go under, because the surf isn't throwing him around like a rag doll. His rifle stays dry. His ammunition stays dry. He can see the beach ahead, can see the obstacles, can see his objective. 30 yards to his left, another landing craft hits an obstacle. The steel hedgehog rips through the hull. Water pours in. But because the waves aren't as violent, because the boat isn't being thrown around, the men evacuate in relatively good order. They swim and wade toward shore instead of drowning in the surf. A medic named Sarah Chin, attached to the 116th as part of the medical detachment, watches from the next wave of boats. She's Chinese-American, one of thousands of Asian Americans serving despite the racism they face at home. She's trained for this. She's ready. But nothing really prepares anyone for the reality of combat. As her boat approaches, she sees men struggling in the water, sees the sand churned up by explosions, sees bodies floating. But she also sees something else. Men making progress. Men moving up the beach. Men finding cover. The improved conditions mean more soldiers reach the beach alive, and that means Chin and the other medics have more people to save, which sounds grimmer but actually represents hope. Every man who reaches cover wounded instead of dying in the surf is someone they can help. The beachmaster for this sector, Lieutenant Frank Morrison, has what might be the hardest job on the beach. He's supposed to organize the chaos, direct landing craft to the right spots, clear obstacles, keep traffic moving despite the bullets and shells raining down. In terrible conditions, this becomes impossible. Boats pile up. Traffic jams form at the water's edge. Men bunch together, making perfect targets. But with better visibility, weaker currents, and lower waves, Morrison can actually do his job. He can see the boats coming in. He can wave them left or right to avoid obstacles. He can spot gaps in the German fire and direct men toward them. He's standing in water up to his thighs, wearing a soaked uniform and a helmet that feels like it weighs 100 pounds, and he's terrified out of his mind, but he's functional. That functionality saves lives. Up on the bluffs overlooking the beach, German defenders see the invasion unfolding. Oberstfreiter Klaus Müller mans an MG-42 machine gun in a concrete bunker. He's 23 years old, from a small town near Munich, and he didn't want this war. He was conscripted. He follows orders because the alternative is execution. When the bombardment starts, he cowers in the bunker with his gun crew, praying they survive. When it stops, he moves to the gun and starts firing at the boats. He sees men fall. He sees the water turn red. He feels sick but keeps firing because that's what you do when you're in a bunker with nowhere to go and men with rifles want to kill you. But he also sees something that makes him and his loader exchange worried glances. The Americans are getting across the beach faster than they should. They're more organized. More boats are hitting the right spots. The concentrated fire that would normally slaughter the first waves isn't as effective because the targets are more spread out, better positioned, moving more quickly through the kill zone. Muller doesn't know anything about meteorology or tidal windows. He just knows the attack is going better for the Americans than the officers said it would. He keeps firing until the barrel of his gun glows red and the bunker fills with acrid smoke. Then American artillery finds his position. The world becomes noise and pressure and flying concrete. When the dust settles, Muller's loader is dead. Muller himself has shrapnel in his shoulder and can't hear out of his left ear. He abandons the gun and retreats inland with the other survivors. Later, when he's captured, he'll tell interrogators that the Americans seemed to land with more coordination than he expected. He won't know that coordination came partly from improved weather conditions that allowed landing craft to navigate more accurately, that allowed units to stay together, that allowed momentum to build before German fire could achieve the devastating effect it had in the actual invasion. 5 miles inland, the town of Saint-Mireglise sits quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. Marie Dubois, a 60-year-old widow, lies awake in her bed, listening. She's lived in this town her entire life. She knows every street, every house, every neighbor. For 4 years, German soldiers have occupied her home, requisitioning rooms, eating her food, treating her like a servant in her own house. She hates them with the kind of quiet intensity that comes from daily indignities. She listens to the BBC on a hidden radio. She passes information to the resistance when she can. She prays for liberation but fears what liberation will cost. Now she hears aircraft. Hundreds of aircraft. The sound builds until it fills the night, until her windows rattle, until she can feel the vibration in her chest. American paratroopers. She doesn't know the details, but she knows what it means. The invasion is starting. In the improved weather window of our scenario, cloud cover is reduced. This matters for the paratroopers more than for almost anyone else. In the actual D-Day operation, thick clouds forced transport aircraft to fly through solid overcast. Pilots lost visual contact with each other. They broke formation to avoid collisions. When they reached the drop zones, they scattered paratroopers across miles of Norman countryside. Some men landed in flooded fields and drowned, weighed down by equipment. Some landed in trees and hung there until Germans found them. Some landed in towns held by enemy troops. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions accomplished their missions, but at terrible cost and with massive disorganization. In better conditions, with improved visibility, pilots can maintain formation. They can identify drop zones more accurately. They can drop their sticks of paratroopers in tighter patterns. This means units land closer together. It means officers can find their men. It means objectives get taken faster and with fewer casualties. Marie watches from her window as parachutes blossom in the sky. Some land in the fields outside town. Some land in the streets. She hears gunfire. She hears shouting in English and German. She stays in her house, praying until an American paratrooper kicks in her door and searches the rooms. He's young, maybe 20, his face streaked with camouflage paint. He asks in broken French if there are Germans in the house. She tells him no, tells him the Germans moved out yesterday, tells him to be careful because there's a machine gun nest at the church. He thanks her and disappears into the night. Later, she'll help American medics treat wounded soldiers in her kitchen. She'll share what little food she has. She'll cry with relief and grief at the same time, the way people do when liberation comes mixed with violence. Back on the beach, the situation evolves hour by hour. The improved conditions mean more men and equipment get ashore. Engineers blow gaps in the obstacles. Tanks roll off landing craft and churn up the sand. Artillery pieces get dragged above the high tide line. Medical aid stations multiply. Supplies stack up. By noon, the beach is still dangerous, still under fire from German positions that haven't been cleared, but it's no longer the killing ground it was in the first hour. The difference between manageable casualties and catastrophic casualties lies in those first critical minutes. When more men survive the initial landing, they can suppress enemy fire faster. When enemy fire gets suppressed faster, subsequent waves suffer fewer losses. The effect compounds. Each successful wave makes the next wave safer. Saracen works in an aid station set up in the lee of the seawall. She's been treating wounded men for 4 hours straight. Her uniform is soaked with blood and seawater. Her hands shake from exhaustion and adrenaline. A sergeant with a sucking chest wound. A private who lost his foot to a mine. A lieutenant with shrapnel peppered across his back. She does what she can with sulfa powder and bandages and morphine, stabilizing them for evacuation to the ships. She looks into their eyes and sees terror and pain and gratitude. Some of them will die despite everything she does. Some will live because she was fast enough, skilled enough, lucky enough. She thinks about the ones she couldn't save, the ones who drowned before reaching shore, the ones who bled out before help arrived. She thinks about how many more there would be if conditions had been worse. She doesn't know about Thornton and his weather charts. She just knows that somehow, despite everything, more men are surviving than she expected. She doesn't have time to wonder why. She just keeps working. By evening, the beach is secure. Thousands of men have come ashore. The cost has been terrible. No amount of favorable conditions eliminates the price of war. Men have died. Men have been torn apart by explosions, drowned in the surf, shot by machine guns, crushed by collapsing bunkers. But the hypothetical 52% reduction means specific, individual human stories. It means James Holloway makes it across the beach and up the bluff. It means Marcus Webb survives to pilot his landing craft through 6 more trips, bringing supplies and reinforcements. It means Frank Morrison manages beach traffic until he collapses from exhaustion at midnight, alive and whole. It means Klaus Muller becomes a prisoner of war instead of dying in his bunker. It means Marie Dubois sees her town liberated without being caught in crossfire. It means Sarah Chin has more wounded to treat but fewer dead bodies to step over. Each of these people exists because of wind speed and tidal current and cloud cover. Each of these people exists because a meteorologist named Robert Thornton understood that nature is not neutral in war. Thornton never sets foot on the beach. He stays in England, monitoring conditions, providing updates to headquarters, tracking the weather systems as they move across Europe. After the invasion succeeds, he writes a report analyzing the meteorological conditions and their impact on operations. His report notes that a delay to wait for a more favorable tidal and wind window might have reduced casualties significantly. The report gets filed away. Thornton goes back to civilian life after the war, teaches at a university, publishes papers on Atlantic storm systems. He gives occasional lectures about the meteorology of D-Day. Most people don't realize how much they owe him. There's no monument to weather forecasters. No memorial to the men who read barometers instead of carrying rifles. But the effect of their work ripples outward through time. Every soldier who survived because conditions were better went home after the war. They had children and grandchildren. They built businesses and communities. They voted and laughed and argued and loved. The absence of their death creates presence, creates life, creates futures that wouldn't exist otherwise. This is what we miss when we think about history. We see the obvious heroes. The men who charged machine gun nests. The medics who braved fire to drag wounded to safety. The generals who made strategic decisions. We don't see the forecasters who understood that timing mattered. We don't see the planners who factored wind and tide into their calculations. We don't see the coxswains who held their boats steady in difficult seas. We don't see the beachmasters who organized chaos into order. We don't see the engineers who blew obstacles while waves crashed over them. History happens in layers. The visible layer is dramatic and obvious. The invisible layer is where most of the work gets done. The mathematical reality of amphibious warfare is that small advantages compound into large outcomes. A 2-knot reduction in wind speed doesn't sound significant, but it reduces wave height. Reduced wave height means landing craft navigate better. Better navigation means units land in correct sectors. Correct sectors mean coordinated attacks. Coordinated attacks mean faster suppression of enemy fire. Faster suppression means lower casualties in subsequent waves. Lower casualties mean more combat power ashore. More combat power means faster achievement of objectives. Faster objectives mean the beachhead gets established before German reinforcements arrive. The beachhead getting established before reinforcements arrive means the invasion succeeds at lower cost. A 2-knot difference in wind speed, multiplied through these cascading effects, can mean thousands of lives saved or lost. The actual D-Day invasion succeeded despite terrible conditions. The men who landed on those beaches were extraordinarily brave and capable. They accomplished their mission through grit and sacrifice and blood. But imagine if they hadn't needed to sacrifice quite so much. Imagine if the conditions had been just a bit better. Not perfect. War is never perfect. Men still die. Men still suffer. But 52% fewer casualties means thousands of families who got their sons and husbands and fathers back. It means thousands of men who didn't drown in the surf, didn't bleed out on the sand, didn't get torn apart by machine gun fire in the first terrible minutes of the assault. It means Sarah Chin had more patience to save and fewer bodies to mourn. It means James Holloway lived to tell his grandchildren about the day he waded ashore in France, cold and scared and alive. Weather is not destiny, but weather shapes possibility. The wind doesn't care about politics or ideology. The tide doesn't care about nation or cause. But the people who understand these forces, who can read the patterns in atmospheric pressure and ocean currents, who can see a window of opportunity in the movement of storm systems, these people save lives. Robert Thornton and his fellow forecasters were warriors in their own way. They fought with slide rules and barometers. They battled uncertainty and incomplete data. They made recommendations that affected millions of lives. They got no medals for this. No dramatic moment in films. No speeches at commemorations. But their contribution was as vital as any soldier's rifle or any general's strategy. The lesson extends beyond D-Day, beyond World War II, beyond military operations entirely. It's about recognizing that expertise matters. That preparation matters. That understanding the systems we operate within, whether those systems are meteorological or economic or social, gives us the ability to make better choices. Thornton's expertise in weather patterns allowed military planners to choose a window that saved lives. That same principle applies everywhere. The engineer who understands structural dynamics designs bridges that don't collapse. The epidemiologist who understands disease transmission shapes policies that save millions during pandemics. The economist who understands market dynamics helps prevent depressions that would destroy livelihoods. Expertise is not glamorous. It doesn't make for exciting movies. But it's the foundation on which civilizations are built and preserved. What if we honored the invisible heroes? What if we built monuments not just to the soldiers who fought but to the forecasters who timed the fight? What if we taught children not just about generals and presidents but about the scientists and planners and logisticians who made victory possible? What if we understood that history is made as much in weather stations and planning rooms as on battlefields? This isn't to diminish the courage of combat soldiers. Their bravery remains extraordinary. But courage alone doesn't win wars. Courage combined with intelligence, preparation, expertise, and favorable conditions wins wars. And sometimes favorable conditions come from men like Thornton who know how to read the sky. The human cost of war is measured in individual stories. Each casualty is a person with a name, a family, a life unlived. When we say 52% fewer casualties, we're talking about specific human beings. A private from Ohio who wanted to be a teacher. A sergeant from Texas who had a wife and 3 kids. A lieutenant from California who loved jazz music. These aren't statistics. They're absences. They're holes in families and communities that never heal. Reducing casualties by 52% means those holes don't exist. It means the teacher gets to teach. The sergeant gets to watch his kids grow up. The lieutenant gets to listen to jazz in smoky clubs after the war. These outcomes aren't guaranteed by better weather. Men still die even in favorable conditions. But the odds shift. The probabilities change. More men come home. That matters more than any strategic objective or tactical victory. It matters in the most fundamental way possible. On June 6, 1944, thousands of men waded ashore into hell. Some died immediately. Some lived long enough to reach cover. Some made it through the day and the campaign and the war. Each of these outcomes was influenced by 1,000 factors. Training, leadership, equipment, enemy positions, and weather. Always weather. The temperature of the water, the height of the waves, the strength of the wind, the visibility in the air. These physical facts of nature shaped who lived and who died as surely as any bullet or bomb. Robert Thornton understood this. He studied the Atlantic weather patterns with the knowledge that his analysis would determine how many mothers received telegrams saying their sons weren't coming home. That's a burden no one should have to carry. But Thornton carried it. He made his recommendations. He did his job with skill and care and professional expertise. The men who landed on the beaches never knew his name. They never knew that someone had studied barometric pressure readings and tidal charts on their behalf. They just knew the water was cold and the bullets were loud and they had to keep moving or die. History remembers D-Day as a triumph of Allied arms, a turning point in the war, the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. All of that is true. But history should also remember D-Day as a lesson in how seemingly small decisions cascade into enormous consequences. The decision to delay by a day. The decision to choose a different tidal window. The decision to wait for the wind to shift. These decisions, informed by scientific expertise and careful analysis, saved lives. We can't know exactly how many. The 52% figure is an educated estimate, a way of quantifying what better conditions might have meant. But the principle is clear. When we respect expertise, when we give weight to scientific analysis, when we plan carefully and time our actions to work with nature instead of against it, we improve outcomes. We save lives. We reduce suffering. This applies to warfare and to everything else. It applies to disaster response and public health and infrastructure and climate policy. It applies anywhere human beings must make decisions in the face of uncertainty and risk. The men and women who participated in D-Day, whether on the beaches or in the air or in the planning rooms or in the weather stations, were part of something larger than themselves. They were part of a collective effort to defeat fascism and defend freedom. Some of them paid the ultimate price. Some of them carried wounds, physical and psychological, for the rest of their lives. Some of them came home whole and tried to forget. All of them deserve recognition. Not just the ones who charged across the sand, though their courage was real and terrible and absolute. But also the ones who made that charge possible. The ones who provided the intelligence and the logistics and the firepower and the timing. The ones who understood that nature is a force multiplier in war, and that working with nature instead of against it improves your chances of survival. Robert Thornton was one of those people. His contribution was intellectual rather than physical, analytical rather than visceral. But it mattered. It saved lives. It changed outcomes. And in the end, that's what matters most. If this story has given you a different perspective on D-Day, on heroism, on the hidden contributions that shape history, then we've accomplished our goal. History is deeper and more complex than the simplified narratives we usually tell. It's not just great men making great decisions. It's thousands of people at every level, doing their jobs with skill and dedication, each contribution adding up to something larger. The meteorologist who reads the weather. The coxswain who steers the boat. The beachmaster who organizes the chaos. The medic who stops the bleeding. The soldier who keeps moving. The civilian who helps when liberation comes. All of them together, shaped by conditions both within and beyond their control, creating outcomes that ripple forward through time into the present moment. If you want to explore more stories like this, stories that uncover the hidden architecture of historical events, subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss anything. Share this video with someone who loves history or someone who needs to understand that expertise and planning and careful analysis matter as much as courage and determination. The world needs both. War needs both. Peace needs both. And understanding the difference between what we can control and what we must adapt to, that understanding might be the most important lesson history has to teach. Thank you for watching. Remember those who served, remember those who planned, remember those who studied the wind and the tide and made the choice that brought more men home alive.